Hi, everybody, and welcome back. This is Todd Kuiper Berman Jr. I'd like to welcome you back to segment number 2 of the 2016 Fantasy Football Draft Lottery Preview Show. Again, I am Todd Kuiper Berman Jr. As I mentioned earlier in my previous segment, we worked on the bottom 4 teams. We also gave a little recap of the league. This week, we're going to work on teams. We're going to look at teams 8 through 6. 8 through 5, my apologies. 8 through 5, not great at math, went to journalism school. Again, not a great math student. So we're just going to jump right into it this week. We won't waste your time on recapping the league once again. So first off, we're going to look at, the 8th place team. And that team would be Team Bag of Dicks. That's right, everybody. The most vulgar name in the league probably goes to Dan Ingram. Happy belated birthday, Dan. But again, Team Bag of Dicks had an absolutely, I guess you could describe it as a shitty regular season. Went 3-10, never could see the final momentum that he had in the previous year. He went from first to worst, definitely not the direction you want to go. He's more of a north-south kind of guy rather than a south-north that actually makes, again, I'm struggling with my directions. Again, a journalism major here, not great with the actions, not great with geography. But let's look at Ingram's team. His running backs and wide receiver position, they were terrible. They were terrible. They went into a cave that was darker than Batman's cave. He only had 3 top players in his entire lineup. That's just not going to cut it. That's what led to the 3-10 record, I believe. He's still an active owner. You got to give him credit. He was trying to make his team better, but it just came to the point where he didn't know what to do. And that's where Ingram was stuck in the conundrum. Again, a very active owner, 3 top 10 players, with his best player probably being his kicker, which is never a good position to be in. If you look at his schedule here, looking through his schedule, he just struggled, man. There wasn't a good time after that. Weeks 8 through 12, he didn't win a game. Actually, it's scratched that. Weeks 8 through 13, he didn't win a game. Started off the season actually pretty solid, but lost those last couple of weeks. And just, you're not going to recover from that. Weeks 8 through 13, that's a massive losing streak, one that's never been seen before in this fantasy league. Hence the name, Team Bag of Dicks. Got a whole bag of dicks shoveled to his door. Not great stuff. It's just overall, not a great team. Not a great team. Like I said, best player was the kicker. Anyways, we're going to bring in our special guest here. We're going to bring in Ole Svensson. Ole, all the way up from the Northland in Minnesota. Ole, how you doing there, buddy? And, we're going to ask you real quick, just where to start. Position do you think Daniel Ingram will address early and often in this year's draft? Hi there, Todd. Thanks for having me on. Ole Svensson here, up in the Northland, reporting at you live from Minnesota, don't you know there. As you know, been a tough year for us Minnesotans. This is really big to me. Vikings have still never won a Super Bowl. Blair Walsh, damn it. The Twins stink. Prince died. Minnesota legend. And, the Timberwolves, they're up and coming. They're up and coming, but, the Target Center just hasn't been filled. And, we're hoping to improve that. We got Towns and Wiggins, but let's get to the fantasy football here, don't you know there. So you're asking me what position I think Dan Ingram can upgrade. Well, you look at his team and just not a lot of hot players. And I don't mean looks-wise. I'm talking about guys that just nobody had a good year. They're not the guys you see out in the boat on Lake Minnetonka pulling in the hotties on Big Island. So if you're asking me what position he needs to upgrade, I would say all of them. Yeah. Always value your insight, Ole. The next thing I would have to ask is, did 2014 success get to the head? If we all remember, he had a very big regular season. I believe he ended up finishing 2nd place in the playoffs. Did it get to this owner's head? Did it get cocky? Did you see that from Ingram, and do you think he can bounce back this year? Yeah. Did 2014 success get to his head? You betcha it did. That guy got real cocky. As you know, Minnesotans, we apparently get cocky from time to time, especially when we're talking about hockey, talking about the Wild. Anyways, yes, it got to his head. It absolutely did. And, he'd take his bags and he packed them for 2015. He thought he had it, and he didn't, And it's just a real disappointment, to see an owner just tank like that, And I don't think he tanked on purpose. It reminds me of when my boat once sank up on Lake Minnewaska. Rest in peace, Big Blue, All right, well, thank you very much, Ole Svensson, for your time. Again, but we're looking back at his schedule, though. I mentioned that massive losing streak here. Let's mention that massive winning streak he had to conclude the year. He won 2 straight games, lost the 3rd game, but again, he had a very strong end of the season. Granted, it was against some weaker teams, but I do think that momentum could carry into the next year, make him a better team, make him a better owner. I know the players on his bench are excited. They want the opportunity. Bunch of bench warmers. Get him in the game, Ingram, because your team sucked last year. It was quite simply a bag of dicks. So moving on, we're moving on to a person who I didn't know could see the future. I didn't know who could predict things. That's right, I'm talking about Max Goldman. I'm talking about Team LA Rams. Now, talk about irony, folks. The Rams no longer located in St. Louis. RIP, St. Louis Rams. Shout out to the LA Rams. Goldman got it right. Now, did his fortune-telling always translate over to the season? No. He was the first team out of the playoffs last year. You know that stings him a little bit. You know that's going to carry with this team. It's going to be a lot of, motivation to get him to the next level. And that's what you need in fantasy football is motivation. You need that power, you need that strength, you need to keep going forward. So let's take a quick look at his team. Again, a fairly active owner, made 33 acquisitions on the waiver wire, 2 trades. Definitely was looking up to players, the sleeper picks, the guys that were going to bed at 10:30 that most people didn't know about. He's a sleeper kind of guy. But, he's a game short of the playoffs. You know that has to sting. You know that has to be good motivation for him. He had 5 top 10 players in his starting lineup. The quarterback position was a particular piece of strength. He had 2 great quarterbacks, 2 top 10 quarterbacks. I'm talking about Eli Manning. I'm talking about Matt Stafford. Do they always win games in real football? No, but we're not talking real football here. We're talking fantasy football. And if you're talking about fantasies, you're talking about predicting the future, and Max Goldman has that ability. He has that ability, and I think that's something that can't be underestimated looking into this year. He's much like Bran from Game of Thrones. He can travel through space and time, and he's already looked at the 2016 fantasy season and is scheming to take everybody in the league down. So speaking of telling the future, let's bring in our great analyst, Ole Svensson. Ole, welcome back. And let me tell you, let me ask you, how do you think Max feels about being the first person out of the playoffs? Yeah, thanks for having me back, Todd. I thought after those first answers, you wouldn't be a very big fan. But anyways, what do I feel about, how Max feels about being the first team out of the playoffs? Well, I think he feels like a Vikings fan, He's always the bridesmaid, never the bride. It reminds me of this one time my sister Lena was up in the north, Alexandria, actually, which is right next to Roseau. And, she was trying to be the bride. And next thing you know, she wasn't. She was a bridesmaid, don't you know? And just an absolute catastrophe for the entire, Svensson family. We were embarrassed. And I think it's embarrassing to be the first team out of the playoffs. And I think that's how Max feels. And I think he's going to translate that over, to the next season. And I have to bring it up. I've already mentioned it a couple times in this segment, Ole. Do you think his ability to see the future is fair? Do you think it's legal? Do you think it'll translate well over to this 2016 season? Oh, gosh. Oh, god darn. Yeah. His ability to predict the future should be highly illegal in fantasy football. I know the word fantasy is in the name, but, football is played on the field, and that's not a fantasy. That's that's real football. And sorry, I watched your last segment with Boomer Wilkinson. I started going into Boomer a little bit. I do apologize. But yes, he can see the future. It's an incredible gift. I think he should use it more often. I think he should have used it to save the Minnesota legend. That's on you. I don't want to talk anymore. Rest in peace, Prince. All right, well, that was Ole. Again, always a treat to have him on. Just an absolute winner through and through. Happy to have him on. We look back at Matt Goldman. He won 4 straight to end the season. Much like Dan Ingram, he's going to be carrying a lot of momentum in that season. Again, looking to the future, maybe a Harry Potter type of deal. He's looking to the future, looking through that Dumbledore thing that he had where he was pulling out the memories. I think Goldman's unlocked the key, everybody. But again, won 4 straight wins to close out the season. Again, a lot like the players we saw in the bottom half of the league, just couldn't establish momentum throughout the entire season. It was off, on, off, on, off, on. Much like a shower when you're trying to find the right temperature. You just can't find it. You're freezing, you're hot, you're burning, you're freezing, you're hot, you're burning. That's what Goldman's team was last year, and so less words. Again, the guy sees the future. You got to be a little bit of intimidated by that. If you're another owner in the league, he had 5 top 10 players, 1 game out of the playoffs. I would not be surprised to see Max Goldman maybe in the top 2, maybe top 3, maybe top 1 of the league next year. That is, my utmost of faith in his abilities as an owner. I think you got to watch out for this guy again. You can't ever underestimate that season to the future. So, all right. So moving on to our next team here. We're talking about Nathaniel Sprunk. We're talking about Team Miller Time. Again, award goes to him for probably the least creative name in the league. Miller Time, of course, a catchphrase by Miller Lite. I'm surprised he was not sued for copyright reasons at some point during the season. But again, this was one of the guys to make the playoffs. He got last place technically in the first place bracket for the playoffs. But, again, you make that playoffs, you give your chance for that money, and that's all you're really asking for. This is a guy who he's been stuck in the middle of the pack for a couple years now. He's had his ups, he's had his downs, but it's mostly been ups. I believe he's made the playoffs the last 2 seasons. Hasn't quite capitalized and led that to that championship trophy. We're going to call it the Lombardi Trophy for now because our trophy does not have a name. We shouldn't name the trophy in this league. But again, he's looking to hoist that trophy. He's always kind of been in that middle-of-the-road pack, kind of stuck in suburgatory. Shout out, not that great a show, but always kind of stuck in suburgatory. He only had 3 top 10 players in his lineup. Again, how does he do it? He's a crafty owner. That's how. He's absolutely crafty. He's been going to Crate and Barrel. He's been going to all those scrapbooking stores. He's been working on it. He's had a girlfriend. I think she's been teaching him a little bit of scrapbooking. I think he's translating those things over to fantasy football, the scrappiness. He drafts somewhat unorganically. He would not be able to sell his draft strategy at Whole Foods. But let me tell you right now, he's a guy who drafts effectively. As you look at his thing, he only made 19 moves, 3 trades. That means he had guys that he wanted from the beginning. That means he had guys that made an impact from the beginning. And to talk about making an impact, you know who I'm bringing in. I'm bringing in Ole Svensson. Ole, what's going on there, buddy? So my real quick question is, I think it's something that's kind of baffling. How can you only have 3 top 10 players and make the playoffs? Only 3 top 10 players, you say? Wow. Quite the conundrum Sprunk was in, He keeps winning, but his roster's not that good. And it reminds me of a roster I once saw play for the Vikings. And I think it was, it was after the 5 years. It might be pre-5 years. Gus Frerotte was the quarterback. Ended up 4-12, and we didn't make any moves. And I think Sprunk lugged out. I think he's going to have to make some more moves next year. If he wants to be that top team, and he wants to be out on the boat, slaying the hotties, drinking himself a nice brew, I think he's going to need to make some more moves next year. And, if he doesn't, he could be in a lot of trouble. He could be, the perennial, middle-of-the-road guy. Yeah. That's how I feel. And my question to you is do you think he's in trouble legally? With Miller Lite. I know if they catch wind of this, he could be in a lot of trouble. So do you think the legal implications that are just hanging over his head like a rain cloud, do you think those will affect him on the fantasy football arena, stadium, field this year? Well, you got to watch out for that Miller Corporation. First off, they're from Wisconsin. And, there's been one good thing coming out of Wisconsin, and that's, the graduates from Minnesota that go to Wisconsin colleges and then come back to Minnesota, because they're loyal through and through. That's what we are. If you're born in Minnesota, you stay in Minnesota. That's it. So yes, I think the legal cloud hanging over his head, it could be big. Could be big. It could definitely impact him. But again, crafty guy, like you mentioned, real crafty. I think he's been hit at that Eden Prairie Mall a few times. And, shout out to the Eden Prairie Mall, somewhat recently renovated. So yeah, I think it's a big issue. I compare it a lot to Deflategate, except there's no deflating. It's just stealing, which Tom Brady didn't steal. Maybe he stole a win, but Okay, and thank you very much for your time, Ole. So let's take a little bit more in-depth look at Nathan Sprunk's team. Again, I only mentioned 3 top 10 players, but those players were winners. He had the best defense in the league, which in this league, defense gets a lot of points, and so that translates to a lot of victories. Nathan Sprunk was the direct beneficiary of this correlation between top defenses and winning in top fantasy teams. He also looked at his roster. He had Delaney Walker, nice tight end, really surprised tight end, really emerged with Marcus Mariota at the quarterback position. Didn't do as well with Zach Mettenberger at the quarterback position. Zach Mettenberger now a free agent on the market. Probably going to get drafted by Carl Krause a little bit later this year in the fantasy football draft. That's a shout out to you, Carl. And please don't draft Zach Mettenberger. But again, we're now looking at his schedule a little bit more in depth. Had a nice little winning streak from week 6 to 8. Carried that momentum into the playoffs. But then he goes into the playoffs and loses 4 straight. And I'm not talking about 4 straight close games. I'm talking about 4 absolute shellackings. Let's go through this. Actually, scratch that. First game of the playoffs was close. I think his heart was broken after that. He turned off his fantasy team. He turned off his computer. Rumor is he threw the computer out his 4-story window, and he smashed it. Took him 3 weeks to get a new one. But again, looking at the last 3 games, 134 to 85, he's the 85. 151 to 84, he's the 84. And 117 to 95. Those aren't close games. Those aren't close games in any standard. Whether you're at the bar with a woman, whether you're playing fantasy football, you're not close to having any kind of game. And do you think that impacts him? I think he's going to come back more motivated, people. This guy's a hard worker. He's a grinder type. I know Ole likes him because he's a grinder. And, maybe a Gruden grinder. And speaking of Gruden grinders, I'm talking about our next team. I'm talking about our 5th place team. I'm talking about Spider 2Y Banana. I'm talking about Cameron Herman. The only team in this league that's owned by 2 people. Again, they're both Cameron Herman, but again, it is owned by 2 people. Now, Spider 2Y Banana, always known to be the 2nd best play in football besides Snake X YZ Cucumber Pineapple. Best play in football. If you don't know what it is, find out, Google it, research it. You know Cameron has because he's a crafty fantasy owner. Again, a big-time winner. You look at this guy's starting lineup, and you wonder how the hell he ended up in 5th place. I mean, just unbelievable. He had 6 top 10 players in the starting lineup. Usually that's my key for winning is 6 top 10 players. Those players, of course, being Lamar Miller, David Johnson, Rob Gronkowski, the Cardinals defense, and, of course, Cairo Santos, one of the best kickers in fantasy football last year. Really choked round one of the playoffs, so we'll go into that a little bit more depth once we bring in Ole here. But again, Mike Evans, exactly. I can't even pronounce his name. Just like the guy can't catch a football. His late season swoon really impacted Cameron, really hurt the wide receiver position for him. Definitely the weakest position on his team. He thought Gronkowski would offset that wide receiver position a lot, but when you have 2 shitty wide receivers, that doesn't equal 1 good tight end. You can't make up for it. But the quarterback position also could have been better as well. If you're looking at his quarterback, he's starting a top 15 quarterback in a 12-person league. That shouldn't happen unless you got greedy people like Matt Skolterman holding on to 2 quarterbacks, and in that case, you should make a trade. And this is a guy that made trades. This is a guy that made 66 moves in 8 trades. Tops the league in moves. An unbelievable amount of moves because he signed up for an unbelievable amount of fantasy football advice websites. I think the only reason he wanted to win the league was so he could pay back all the money he owed to the fantasy football websites. I'm talking Fantasy Pros, I'm talking ESPN, I'm talking Rivals. I don't even know if they have a fantasy site, but if anything has a fantasy site, Cameron was paying for it at least $10 a month. He needed this buy back. He needed the money back to pay the vendors back, and that was his real problem. Again, put a lot of desperation in the playoffs, put a lot of pressure on himself. You don't like seeing that in fantasy football. Again, it is just a game, but it's a game we like winning. And speaking of winning, I'm going to bring in one of my favorites, Ole Svensson. Ole, 6 top 10 players in the starting lineup. What happened? Yeah, 6 top 10 players. You don't see that very often on a losing team. You don't. And so Cameron, you know he was frustrated. You know he had a tough year. And, you know, he's been out sitting there contemplating. I heard he was in the Himalayas. I know you mentioned that last segment, Todd. We're tying everything back in here. But yeah, tough year. 6 top 10 players, you expect a championship. Couldn't have said it better myself. Ole couldn't have said it better myself. And, you know, you look at this guy. He's on a lot of websites. You know he's already done a lot of reading. And he had 6 top 10 players in his starting lineup, as we already addressed. Do you think he's one of the early season favorites? Is he one of the favorites going into next year? Bold question there, Todd. Bold question, let me tell you right now. This is the boldest thing I've seen since I saw that guy recently on Christmas Lake. Yeah, he was driving his truck to go pick up his, his ice house, and it was hot. It was 54, 55 degrees. I was out in shorts and my flip-flops, and he was out there driving a big truck. And I turned to my cousin, Jason, Jason, and he said, "That's not a good idea, Ole." And I said, "Oh Oh, no, no, it's not. But, again, is he one of the favorites? Probably. But, the draft is a crazy time. Lots of things can happen. And I don't necessarily like to call people favorites. We don't play favorites up here. We play duck, duck, gray duck. We're a friendly people. And, yeah, I'm excited to see what he does, though. 6 top 10 players, that means he's doing something right. And that's Ole, everybody. Just an absolute good man through and through. Minnesota bred. You'll probably catch him out in Lake Minnetonka a little bit here later today, enjoying the mosquitoes, enjoying the nice, cool temperature. Supposed to get up to 90 up there in the Northland, so stay cold, everybody. But again, looking at this lineup, top 10 players across the board. He even had one on his bench. That means I'm talking about a top 10 tight end. This guy had 2 top 10 tight ends. A little bit of selfishness. Good when you're outside of the bedroom. Great in fantasy football. Bad in the bedroom. Again, that doesn't necessarily translate. I just thought it'd be a funny joke. I'm throwing it out there. It didn't hit as well as I would like it, but, shit happens. But looking at this schedule, he got hot in the middle of the season. He won 4 straight games in the middle of the season. That's the kind of momentum that's going to carry you to the playoffs, and that's exactly what Cameron did. He carried that mo into the playoffs, had a nice season, something you can definitely hang your hat on, but he didn't get that championship trophy. He was swept in the regular season, though, by Chuck and Crane. I call it the curse of the C's. Cameron, Chuck, Crane. Crane, of course, not his first name, not even his middle name, it's his last name, but again, it's a C. I think Cameron's intimidated by the letter C. Hopefully he can play a lot more players with a name D in it this year, and or an F or an E. E, of course, goes before F, but I think E is a little bit more intimidating, because C-A-E. I don't even know what that makes sense. But anyways, he averaged one of the league highs, 104 points per game. This is a good team, everybody. This is a guy you got to look out for next year. This guy got to be a little bit intimidated of. Again, if he can avoid Crane and Chuck on his schedule twice and not get swept, those are 4 of his losses. He only lost 5 games during the regular season, everybody. This guy was a tough guy to take down, a real good team. But anyways, that's part 2 of the Fantasy Football Recap. Stay tuned for part 3 on Friday, and of course the part you've all been waiting for, the 2016 Fantasy Football Draft Lottery. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me on. Again, I am Todd Kuiper Berman Jr. Have a wonderful evening.